years. I'm here talking to you as a living proof of the slavery which still exists. 25 years ago, Charles Jacobs helped to liberate tens of thousands of slaves in Africa and received an award from Coretta Scott King for his work. Today, Simon and Charles are co-founders of the newly formed African Jewish Alliance.
Hamas is no different than Boko Haram in Nigeria. It's one front in Israel, but it belongs to a global movement, and people need to know that.
This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Yanya Kellick. Simon Deng, Charles Jacobs, such a pleasure to have you on American Thought Leaders.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. So Simon, let's start with you. A lot of us, Americans, Canadians, frankly, people in the West, believe that slavery is something that is an issue of the past, the distant past. But you're actually kind of living proof that that's not true, that it exists today. So why don't we just start with your story? Thank you for having me here. I'm here talking to you as a living proof of the slavery which still exists in the country of Sudan. When I was a child, I was kidnapped from my loved ones, brought to Northern Sudan, and I was given away as a gift. And I was a slave in Sudan when I was 9 years old. There's also, you're from South Sudan, which is now a separate country. What is happening there? For a lot of people, this idea is just something that they won't be able to fathom unless you give us a bit more background. Yes, it is true, because when we talk about Sudan, we talk about a country where there is no media, there is no cameras on the ground to bring the footage, especially when you're talking about people who are so dark, so far, nobody even look at them as a human being exist. A country of Sudan has been in war for so long. The Northern Sudanese was fighting the Southern Sudanese before the secession, which happened in 2011. The conflicts between the Northern Sudanese and the Southern Sudanese, it started in 1955. There was a temporary peace agreement in 1972 where the sitting government in Sudan, which is everybody thought that is a government for all peoples, but unfortunately it was a government for particular people in Sudan, Muslim in the north, Arabs in the north, Africans are irrelevant, they are not being considered. The same government who signed peace agreement with the Southerners in 1982 went and canceled the agreement which was between them, and Sudan was declared as an Islamic state next to Iran. The first African country in the continent of Africa to become an Islamic state is the country of Sudan, where now everybody was subject to the Sharia law, everybody was subject to the Islamic law, to a point where the Southern Sudanese felt that the fourth citizens of a country, because the first, in Islam, the first citizen is the Muslims, the second citizen of a country is a woman, and the third citizen of a country is another Muslim from other country. And the war broke out in 1982, which caused 2 million Southern Sudanese was perished, was a slaughter, because the jihad was declared on the infidel in Southern Sudan. It was one of the ruthless war in the world, where you have other people from other countries, they have to go volunteer to fight the infidel in the name of jihad, including people like Osama bin Laden, which the world become known. Osama bin Laden was in Khartoum executing the policy of jihad against the infidels. The Al-Qaeda was created in Khartoum, in which that all Osama bin Laden soldiers was fighting Southern Sudanese at that time. Those who think that slavery is on the past because they don't know what is happening in Southern Sudan, because we don't have a camera there, we don't have anybody in that place. Even that a journalist, a Western journalist, for them to go into that place, they have to get a permission from a sitting government, a government who doesn't want any foreigner to see what is taking place in that country. Now, Charles, I'm going to jump to
Now
you in just
y'all
a
know
moment,
the
because I
truth.
know you can flesh this out. You've been working on this issue for now almost 3 decades, I think. But can you just tell me what happened in your village?
You know what happened in the first place? I was born in the village where we were subjects to attacks on monthly basis, yearly basis. The government troops will come and burn down the villages, kill whoever that they will find. Usually, we have to run to the bush, and the government will come and burn down everything, and our fathers will come back and then build the villages again. Because to build a village, you need some small thing that you can go cut some wood and build a hut. That's where we are. We are not in a city like any other places. And when I see what happened recently in Israel, where they went and burned down and shot people, that's exactly what I experienced when I was a child. And especially when somebody shooting somebody, killing somebody, and have a word in his mouth, Allah Akbar, which is God great. That made me wonder what kind of God it is. That's exactly what I experienced as a child.
So you were captured?
My dad decided to take his family to the town, which is the capital in Malacan, which is the city. Was in a village. It was in that town where one of my neighbors at that times was leaving, going to the northern Sudan, and he asked me that to help him with his luggage. And as a child, if somebody say help me, and then I did. So he told me to sit next to his luggage in the steamers, that he's going to get something in the market. He didn't show up at the same times until the steamers leave, and I become terrified. Right? Immediately he came to calm me down, telling me that don't worry, the steamer left the station, cannot go back, so we will go all the way to the destination, a city of Kosti in northern Sudan. And he promised me that when we arrive in Kosti, he will put me there to the other steamer which coming back to southern Sudan, which was a lie. When we arrived in Kosti, we walking into the city with him, a grown-up man, a northerners, a Muslim person, with 3 African kids with him, and we didn't know ourselves. And that's how I end up in his hand, and where he went and gave me away to his relative as a gift.
The last part of the story is, how is it that you managed to get out? I understand it was about 4 years that you were in.
3.5 years.
Okay.
What happened was that in the city of Fashishoye in the northern Sudan, my slave master family, they have a son which need to go to the junior high schools. In that village of Fashishoye in northern Sudan, there is no junior high school, so they have to move to Kosti. It was in Kosti when one day I saw the 3 Shilluk gentlemen with the Shilluk tribal marks in their first life. What I have today, I didn't have those tribal marks at that time. In fact, during my duration as an slave, I was even given an option by my slave master that if I want to be treated like a human being, I have to take the offer that on the table, which is convert to Islam, given Arab names, and become their son, which I was willing to convert to Islam if that will save me from what I go through every day. And I was willing even to take the Arab names if that will make me to be treated like a human being. But the third one, it was very difficult to take that to become their son. In my mind, even that I was a child, I have a mom who loved me so dearly, and I have a dad. I have a wonderful family. I was kidnapped against my will. Nobody knows what happened to me. Now, how can I give away my identity? During that times, there is one word that I know. Yes, and yes, and yes to everything. I cannot say no to anything, everything, even to the torture that I have to say yes to it. So what I always tell them that yes, I will let you know. I will let you know. I'm buying times because I'm relying on 2 things, hope and faith, that one day somebody will come and say that a child should not go through what I went through. And that hope and faith came when their son had to go to the junior high school. So it was in city of Costa when I saw the 3 the gentlemen with the Shilluk tribal marks. This is what I have been waiting for. So I went to them with so happiness in my face because of the tribal mark they have in their forehead, and I didn't have one. So all I have is to communicate with them in the Shilluk language. And then, unfortunately, one of them said to me that they come from northern Shilluks, and I come from southern Shilluks, in which that they don't know my mom, my dad, because all I have to do, tell them my mom name, my dad name, and my village name. I just assume that they know. When he said that, without me realizing, the tears was running down in my face. I got disappointed. And then the other person came and put his hand on me, telling me that, don't cry. The only thing that we don't know your mom, but there is somebody that we know who came from the village that you mentioned. So we will go to that person. Tomorrow we will come and we will meet you in this place. And indeed, I was there before them, and here they come. I couldn't believe what I saw. Somebody that I knew from the village. And that individual himself broke down in tears crying. For 2.5 years, my dad was looking for me. My dad has put an offer 10 cow to whoever that will come and tell him about his son. 2.5 years passed by. Nobody came to claim 10 cows. So my parents went and put the funeral of their lost child and their child together. And that's why he was crying. So he told me that I should not inform my slave master that I met somebody that I know, because he was afraid that I would be taken to a place where I would not be found. And indeed, I kept that promise. He was the one who rescued me and took me out from the slavery. Without him, I wouldn't be here with you today as a free man talking to you in a free country, which is the United States.
Simon and Charles, we're going to take a quick break right now, and we'll be right back. Co-founders of the African Jewish Alliance. Charles, you've been busy in your life helping to liberate some of these slaves from the region. I think you've even gotten an award from Corletta Scott King for doing so.
Well, so I started the American Anti-Slavery Group. And, I got a lot of interest from decent people. I wrote a piece in the New York Times that broke the story about the slavery in Mauritania and Sudan. And I started to build an organization on behalf of a people most Americans had thought long ago vanished, black chattel slaves. I am Charles Jacobs, the research director of the American Anti-Slavery Group, an organization of American and African abolitionists, black and white, Christian, Muslim, and Jewish, who have for 3 years endeavored to place the issue of present-day slave trade and black slaves on America's national agenda.
This is America. We tore this country apart over the issue of one man owning another, and this is New York. This is the gateway to freedom where millions of Americans escape tyranny and despotism and timeless slavery. Sudan must be evicted from the United Nations. You can't have a slaughterer and enslaver of people sit in the United Nations.
And we got the NAACP, we got all kinds of Eleanor Holmes Norton, important black congressmen. We got people really concerned about this. So you had this Arab Islamic regime, extremist regime, declared a jihad against the black Christian South. And militias would storm African villages. They would shoot the men, because this is not the kind of slavery in the sense that we had, because you don't need musculature. They didn't get them because they wanted to do rice harvest or cotton picking. This was all for concubinage and humiliation and spreading their culture through the womb of the captured slave women. Okay, so that's how it was different. At some point, I met this wonderful guy from a group called Christian Solidarity International. His name is John Eidner. He's the hero of all of this. And he was working to figure out how to buy back the slaves that the North took from the South. Christian Solidarity International figured out that if they paid certain Arabs who lived near the border, who wanted to cooperate and didn't want to have war with the black South, those guys could go up north and steal or buy or find people like Simon who were there and bring them back. So it turned out to be $35 or $50 per slave. And we raised, and in Europe they raised, but in America we raised tens and tens of thousands of dollars. And we got on TV, and it was really interesting. And kids all over were chipping in. There were nice little stories on NBC or CBS of little kids chipping in money to bring back slaves. And I finally went to South Sudan illegally. We went through Kenya.
Because you cannot go through the Khartoum.
Yeah, you can't go through the north. The north wouldn't let you go. So we went illegally. I went with Christian Solidarity International. We would walk for half a day to a clearing where there's this huge shade tree, and there were hundreds of women and children, slaves that had been returned from the back, and they were waiting for us. And did they really know they were going to be redeemed? It must have been a horrible night for them. They were told they were going to be freed. Why would they believe it? And Eibner came with a duffel bag full of cash. It was the most amazing scene you ever saw. And he sat down next to the retrievers, the Arab retrievers, and he paid and paid and paid, and it was all done. I'm going to get emotional. He stood up and he said through a Dinka, it was mostly Dinka people that were enslaved, and he said to a Dinka translator, you are blessed by God. Don't think about what they made you do. Good people from the West paid for your freedom, and now you are free. And whoa, I experienced that 3 or 4 times in my life, and I just. So when that happens, their families, which were brought nearby, start screaming and jumping and dancing, and I was dancing with them, and it was just the most amazing thing I ever did in my life, except for marrying my wife, which I should say. We saved, CSI saved tens of thousands of people this way, and eventually the word got to George Bush, President Bush, and he forced Khartoum to do a plebiscite to allow the South to vote whether or not they wanted to stay, because that region is mostly black Christian and African Christian in the South. And of course, they voted 99.999% to leave, and then that's why we have the newest state nation in the world, the South Sudan. So now, the same thing is happening in Nigeria. The same thing is happening in maybe 10 African countries, Mali, Somalia, Burkina Faso, as this ideology that says we can do this expands and gets militant, and nobody wants to pay attention to that. So we have formed the African Jewish Alliance.
Right, which is you're here to kind of inaugurate this.
Yeah, we're here. Yeah. We're here in Congress. We're talking to Congress, and because what happened to the Jews on October 7th of last year is exactly what I saw when I was in Sudan. The same MO: raiding villages, shooting people, burning them alive, raping and gang raping the girls, and then taking them as slaves. They just, we recently celebrated the return of 4 Israeli hostages. And the girl, Noah, reminds me of the girls that I met when I was in Sudan interviewing survivors of the slave raids. It's the same thing. We went to the slave redemption sites, and we talked to the survivors who were brought back. And they told us their stories. And this beautiful girl was telling me that when the jihadists came to her village and slaughtered people, they lined up the girls. And they grabbed one girl and they wanted to rape her. And she resisted. And they slit her throat in front of the other girls. No one else resisted. They told me that they would chop people's feet off who tried to run away. They told me that they would burn people's huts with people in them. It's hard to listen to that. The one thing they didn't do, which the Hamas did, was the jihadists didn't have GoPro cameras. So now you can actually see what they did to the blacks if you watch what Hamas did to the Jews. we formed this organization. We have Igbos, we have Darfuris, we have South Sudanese, we have Nigerians, we'll get Mauritanians. And these people live in the United States, the ones we're working with. And they're a constituency that is important and powerful. So our goal is to inform decent American people that blacks and Jews are being tortured, murdered, and enslaved based on the same ideology. In other words, Hamas is no different than Boko Haram in Nigeria. It's one front in Israel, but it belongs to a global movement, and people need to know that.
Your organization that you work with bought tens of thousands of people, for $35 to $50, I think you said. Somehow that really makes it hit home, doesn't it?
The abolitionists in America decided to do the same thing. They bought Frederick Douglass's freedom. So because he was in the North, and he was the biggest voice for abolition in the North, and they were afraid. I mean, he was an escaped slave, and they were afraid that the Southerners would come up and get him. So they purchased his freedom. We're supposed to have been a progressing human culture, and we're supposed to have been beyond this, and yet it was, and it still is, and it's just politically kind of incorrect to point it out when it's not done by Westerners.
Well, Simon Dang, Charles Jacobs, it's such a pleasure to have had you on the show.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.